Do you record guitar parts or bass parts in your home studio and struggle with having to use the keyboard and taking your hands off the fretboard and changing focus and then using the keyboard to control, play, record? In this video I'm going to show you how I use my Helix LT and also how you can expand this onto a HX Stomp to control the play, stop, record, undo of your favorite DAW, be that Pro Tools, Reaper, Logic, etc. My DAW of choice is Reaper. However, what I'm going to go through can work with any of the others: Pro Tools, Ableton Live, Cubase, Studio One, etc, etc. You can even use it to control things like YouTube, Spotify, and Mainstage. The challenge with recording alone is the tedious movements of the mouse, the double finger tapping around things like Command R to record, spacebar to play, which require you to take your hands off the instrument and focus on the keyboard to do what you're doing. The one that really annoys me is undo. Control R, Control Z. They're not necessarily in the right space for my fingers, and I find it distracts me when I'm going through. Yes, I shouldn't be making so many mistakes, but you know, that's how we go. Genius doesn't come in a bottle. Distracting yourself with the keyboard often leads to more mistakes than necessary as you record, stop, undo, record, and haven't got back in time to be ready again, often requiring you to rethink your genius. The amazing cleverness of the Line 6 engineers have solved the problem by allowing us to use the foot switches that come with our Helix, floor, LT, stomp, to control our DAW of choice with our feet, leaving our hands on the fretboard, our focus on what we're playing, and without having to worry about commands or keyboard gymnastics in order to get the take we want. Let's have a look at my configuration of the Helix LT through HX Edit to see how this will work. Your Helix Floor or LT device will have a number of set lists that have been created to get you started with current common guitar tones. So Factory One, for example, has got starting settings for an SVT normal bass tone. These you should be pretty familiar with. What they also have is there are up to 8 set lists that you can use. Most are user, so Factory One, Factory Two, and then user defined. The 8th one is for templates. And in this set list you'll find structures to get you started with. Things like a quick start. So using quick start, if you've never used a Helix before, this gets you up and running with a very basic amp, verb, etc. We can also see examples of if you want to use the 4-cable method. This gets you started with how to set up for a 4-cable method. You can then replace the blocks with your own blocks, but this is the structure to get you to a 4-cable method. From 5D, 6A onwards, you can see we start to get into controlling applications. So digital audio workplaces such as Cubase, Pro Tools, Logic, Ableton Live, Reaper, etc., Studio One, but also other applications like YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, even how to remote control Apple Keynote. Steve Salachi has done a fantastic video on how to use the Helix to control YouTube, so I thoroughly recommend you follow this link and check out his video. If we only want to use Helix as a controller for one of these applications, in my case Reaper, then using the Reaper for Mac or Reaper for Windows patches allows me to do this. However, when recording alone, I'm usually using my Helix LT as an amp and FX modeler, so that's not going to completely work for me. Because if I look through here, double click on the Reaper for Mac, you can see there are no amps, effects, etc. on there. What I want to do, like creating my own tone patches, is take the instructions from the template and add them to the patch that I use for my recording. If we open up Command Center, so Window, Command Center, you can see through these green arrows that even though the patch is empty, there are a number of foot switches assigned to something. If we click on Footswitch 11, we can see it's labeled record. It's got a color of red. It's a momentary switch type. It has a command type of hotkey. It has a modifier of the command splat symbol for a Mac. And it has a keystroke of R. So in Reaper, the record is command R. So what this is doing is now setting up this switch to send a command control R to Reaper, allowing me to turn on record. Similarly, if we look at Footswitch 10, you can see this one's now labeled play and stop. It's colored green. It has a keystroke of space. It's still commanded by a hotkey, but there are no modifiers. In Reaper, to play or stop the session, you press the space bar. So this is giving this switch the ability to send the command of spacebar to Reaper to stop or play. When creating a patch for use in recording sessions, it's as simple as copying one of these templates, in my case, the Reaper for Mac one, and pasting it into the set list of choice. So if I go up here to my recording set list, I can now look down here and see my Reaper for Mac, and that is the Reaper for Mac template that I've copied across. Once in here, I can now add, I can add amps and cabs and do a whole bunch of stuff to that to set it up as a preset. Alternatively, knowing now how the foot switches are configured using the hotkey command on the Command Center, I can take what I've learnt from that template and apply it now to my patch of choice. So let's look at how I would set up my Attitude 810 patch, which is the one I use to record my Attitude dual output bass using an Ampeg SVT and a 8x10 cabinets. So here you can see the patch has been configured. As I have my LT configured in global settings as a preset stomp, so I can use the top layer of switches to change between patches and the lower foot switches as stomp controls, I still want switches 1 and 7 to remain patch up and patch down, and I'd like foot switch 12 to remain as the tuner. That gives me 4 switches that I can use to configure for DAW control. So if I now check out Command Center, Windows Command Center, you can see I have 4 foot switches allocated to controls. Foot switch 8, I have as play stop. I've colored it as green. I've made it momentary. I've put space, and it's a hotkey to control it. Foot switch 9, I've made the record button. I've colored it red. I've given it a modifier of the command splat. I've given it the keystroke of R, and that's now the record button. Foot switch 10 is my undo. So quite often I'll record, stuff it up, and then have to undo it. So instead of doing a Control Z or a Command Z keyboard, then I will just press this button, which will add the Command Z, and that will then undo it. So now with my foot switch, I can do play, stop, record, stop, undo. The final one I'm using for my bass one is home. So this basically resets to the beginning of the track. So instead of doing W on the keyboard, I'm now telling this switch to basically send the W key press to Reaper so that it will go back to the beginning of the track. You can see up here, hotkey is one of the options. Quite often, you're probably using either HX preset or the HX snapshot options. So this is where we're choosing hotkey to be able to send key commands. For my guitars, my Revstar and my Pacifica, I've got the same thing set up. However, on these, I'd like Footswitch 11 to be used to go between snapshots. So this allows me to go between my clean and dirty tones still through the foot switch. This limits me for play, stop, record, and undo only. Now again, I can make these any Reaper commands that I can use through a keyboard. I've chosen that for my solo recording, these are the 3 or 4 key buttons that I need to be able to control to keep my hands on the fretboard while I'm recording. Everything else I can do once I've stopped recording, I can change patches, I can add effects, I can do a bunch of things, and then I can go back into record mode. So the difference between my recording version and my non-recording version is the FootSwitches in my live rigs are more designed around changing between patches or putting on and off effects. Whereas in the record mode, I'm using those buttons to allow me to start and stop and record and undo, which keeps my hands on the fretboard, stopping me from losing concentration. Here's how it's working in action. So I've got Reaper open. I have a single track. It is set with an input. I've armed the track so it's ready to record. So now as I press the Reaper control on my Helix, the red button is going to start recording. I can then press the play stop button and it's now stopped. I can now press play. It's going to start recording. And it will play through. You can see it's now taking through and stop again. And if I click over to here and I press the home button, it will take me back to the beginning. As you can see, the controls have gone through. The commands are being passed through as if I was using them on the keyboard. So instead of pressing Command R, I'm just pressing the one button on the Helix and it's recording. Instead of pressing spacebar, I'm pressing the button on the Helix, and I can do that with my foot, or I can use it with my fingers. I can also add an external pedal. So the Helix will take a 2-button extension pedal to expand the controls. I have my Helix on my desk, therefore it's not actually under my feet, so putting the buttons up on there isn't as easy as having it under my feet. So I can use an extension foot switch to allow me to do at least 2 of those commands. So I would have it configured, in my case, for record and undo, because they're the ones that I'm going to want. Everything else I can then still do through the buttons on the Helix. So the convenience is, rather than doing Command and R, I can do 1 button on the Helix. So again, makes it easier for my workflow, and the foot switch gives me the ability to still have something under my feet for those ones I need under my feet. My external pedal is a loopy pedal and it's currently with the guitarist, so I can't demonstrate that. However, I do have a Pedaltronics on my HX Stomp, so I'm going to demonstrate how I would configure the external switch from my HX Stomp. Let's have a look at that one. So unlike the LT and the Floor, the HX Stomp only has a single set list. So as you can see here, they've specified them with FX for effects, or for amp-based templates, they're using the DIR or BAS for the bass systems, and they've got a couple for 4-cable method to set you up, but they don't have the control one set. That's fine, because we now know from the other one that the way to control these is through hotkeys. So again, if I want to take any of the existing patches, so let's take the default bass SVT Pro. Okay, so this is out of the box as it comes. If we then do Window Command Center, none of the foot switches have been assigned. Now, the Stomp has 3. I have a Pedalnetics 2 switch, so I actually have now 5 switches. Again, I won't be using my HX Stomp for recording, but again, I could. This gives me 5 switches to do record, play, stop, undo, go to home, redo if I wanted to, or leave the tuner in. For demonstration purposes, I'm just going to show you how I would do the external switches. Now this would work exactly the same as if I was on my LT with an external foot switch. So if I pick this one, which happens to be foot switch 4, I'm going to make this the record. So I go to here, Command, and I want hotkey. I want record. Now if we remember, record for Reaper is Command R. So I'm going to go to Modifier 1, and I'm going to use the Command, and then I'm going down to the keyboard, keystroke, and I'm looking for R. So now I've got Command R as the control. I don't want it to be latching. I want it to be, because I don't want it to stay on. I want it to be momentary. I want to turn it on, turn it off every time I press the button. Color, I'm going to pick red. I can have it auto color or pick a specific color. And in the customizer, I'm going to call that record. So now I have a record button configured for that switch. Similarly, if I want to do Footswitch Live and have that as play stop, again, I go into command, hotkey. The Reaper command for keystroke for play stop is spacebar, so I don't need a modifier. My keystroke, I'm going to go down till I find the word space. I'm going to call that play. And this time I'm going to make it green. Again, could have left it as auto color or any other color. So now I have here. While I'm here, one of the important things to note, and this is the same with the LT and the Stomp, is, so there we have it. That's how we would use an external switch, either on the LT or on the floor. And again, even though the templates aren't available on the HX Stomp, you can still set up the switches on the HX Stomp to do those controls. The important thing to note is, as long as you understand what the keystrokes are for the application you're trying to control, using the hotkey command on the switch through Command Center, you can then have it do that complex control. Well, thanks for watching the video. Hopefully you've learned a little bit more on how you use your Helix in the studio to assist you with your recording process, not just through the tone controls that it gives you. By using the Command Center to program the switches as hotkeys, using any command that your application, your DAW, be it Pro Tools, be it Cubase, or in my case Reaper, or as Steve Slatchy showed you, you can control YouTube with it. Those commands can be put into the hotkey sequence of each switch to allow you to control the application of choice. Also remember that even though the HX Stomp doesn't come with the templates embedded, it still has the capability to be able to do the same functionality. So HX Stompers, don't feel left out. If you like the video and the content, please do a thumbs up and like the channel. It really helps. Please leave comments below and give feedback. If you're using it, what are you using it for and which DAW are you using it for? Or are you using it for another application that I haven't mentioned? Catch you around.